This message is not arriving to teach you something new. It is arriving to interrupt something old. And if you are hearing it now, it means a cycle you have lived inside for longer than you realize has reached a saturation point. Not emotionally, structurally. This is not about motivation or belief. It is about recognition. Because cycles do not reset when you fail. They reset when you almost see clearly and then turn away. And that moment is now. You have felt this before, the sense that life keeps circling the same themes with different faces, different situations, different timing, but the same underlying friction. And each time you told yourself it would resolve later, when you were more ready, more certain, more stable. But readiness does not arrive with certainty. It arrives as discomfort, as a quiet knowing that something wants to change but cannot unless it is acknowledged fully. That knowing is present now. This is not a warning. Nothing bad happens if you ignore this. There is no punishment, no loss, no dramatic collapse. The system is far more neutral than that. The cycle simply resets. The same patterns return, slightly rearranged, until recognition completes itself. And the reason this moment feels precise is because you are no longer unaware. You are aware enough to choose whether this loop continues or quietly ends. A cycle does not repeat because you are doing something wrong. That misunderstanding alone keeps most people trapped far longer than necessary. Cycles repeat because something essential has been perceived but not integrated. Awareness arrives, touches the surface of your life, and then retreats when it is not allowed to reorganize structure. And when structure does not change, reality has no option but to loop. This is not punishment. It is feedback. Most people imagine cycles as emotional patterns or external circumstances, relationships that keep failing, careers that stall, inner states that return no matter how much work they do. But the cycle itself is not the event. It is the orientation behind the event. It is the internal posture you return to when pressure appears. And that posture is often invisible to you because it feels normal, justified, even intelligent. You tell yourself you are being realistic, cautious, patient, grounded. And, in many cases, you are. But realism can still be misaligned. Caution can still preserve distortion. Patience can still postpone coherence. A cycle resets at the exact moment when awareness becomes clear enough to feel uncomfortable, but not yet stable enough to be embodied. That is the threshold. And it is subtle. It does not announce itself with crisis. It arrives as a quiet friction between what you know and how you continue to operate. You sense that something in your life no longer fits the way it used to. But instead of allowing that misfit to change your behavior, you negotiate with it. You explain it away. You delay action not out of fear, but out of logic. And logic is often the final defense of a cycle that is about to dissolve. This is why cycles are so convincing. They do not feel like traps. They feel like reasonable compromises. You tell yourself that now is not the time. That conditions are not clean enough. That you need more clarity, more energy, more confirmation. But confirmation does not arrive before integration. It arrives after. And the system cannot deliver what you are asking for until you hold what you already see without flinching. The reset happens quietly. There is no dramatic failure. Life simply reorganizes in a way that looks new on the surface but feels familiar underneath. New people, same dynamics. New goals, same exhaustion. New insights, same delay. And because the surface has changed, you convince yourself that progress is happening. In some ways it is. You are learning the shape of the loop more precisely each time. But learning alone does not break cycles. Recognition held long enough does. What most people miss is that cycles do not require effort to maintain, they require avoidance. Very subtle avoidance. The kind that looks like intelligence. You avoid fully acknowledging what you already know because acknowledging it would require you to let something end before you are ready to replace it. And the nervous system prefers continuity over coherence. Familiar misalignment feels safer than unfamiliar stability. So the cycle continues not because you are unaware, but because you are partially aware and still negotiating. This is also why cycles accelerate over time. Early repetitions feel spacious. Later ones feel compressed. The lessons arrive faster. The tolerance for distraction decreases. The discomfort sharpens. Not to punish you, but to reduce your ability to pretend you do not see. The system is not becoming harsher. It is becoming more efficient. And efficiency can feel intense when you are still oriented toward delay. Another misunderstanding is that cycles end through action. Action can be part of it, but cycles end through internal alignment first. When your inner posture changes, behavior follows naturally. When behavior changes without posture, the cycle adapts and survives. This is why so much effort feels wasted. You take steps, make plans, initiate change, but something always pulls you back into the same internal position. Because the position was never addressed directly. It was worked around. A cycle resets the moment you choose familiarity over truth. Not dramatic truth, not a revelation. Simple truth. The truth that something in your life requires a different relationship than the one you are maintaining. The truth that waiting has become avoidance. The truth that effort has replaced clarity. And when that truth is felt but not honored, the system records the deferral and reorganizes accordingly. Not against you, around you. It is important to understand that ignoring does not mean rejecting. Most cycles are maintained by people who care deeply, reflect constantly, and genuinely want to evolve. Ignoring looks like overthinking. It looks like gathering more perspectives. It looks like staying busy. It looks like spiritualizing delay. And because these behaviors are socially rewarded, the cycle gains reinforcement. You are praised for patience, resilience, adaptability, when what is actually required is presence. Presence is uncomfortable at thresholds because it removes the option of postponement. When you are fully present with what you know, you cannot unknow it. You cannot return to the previous justification without feeling the misalignment clearly. And that clarity demands a response. Not immediately, not dramatically, but honestly. And honesty is what the cycle cannot survive. The reason this message matters now is not because something external is about to happen. It is because you are aware enough to notice the loop without being overwhelmed by it. That window does not stay open indefinitely, not because time runs out, but because attention moves. If you turn away now, the cycle does not disappear. It simply resets to a version where this level of clarity is no longer available. And later, when it returns, it will require more friction to get your attention again. Understanding this is not meant to scare you. It is meant to stabilize you. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is late. But something is precise, and precision requires participation, not effort, not belief. Participation through presence. Holding awareness without immediately resolving it into explanation or postponement. This is how cycles actually work. They are not broken by force. They are completed by coherence. And coherence is not something you achieve, it is something you stop resisting when the moment arrives. There is a moment inside every cycle where it becomes clear that nothing new is required. No additional information, no further healing, no external permission. That moment is uncomfortable because it removes the illusion that progress is somewhere ahead of you instead of right where you are standing. Section 3 is about that moment, the point where the cycle is no longer sustained by ignorance, but by identity. Because what keeps a cycle alive at this stage is not confusion. It is attachment to who you believe you are within it. Most people think cycles end when circumstances change, but circumstances are downstream. The real anchor is self-definition. The way you see yourself in relation to struggle, effort, patience, resilience, or waiting. If your identity is built around endurance, the system will continue to present situations that require endurance. If your sense of self is organized around becoming, the system will keep you in states of almost, not because you are failing, but because identity always seeks confirmation. And the cycle is the confirmation mechanism. This is why cycles often feel strangely validating, even when they are exhausting. They reinforce a familiar self-image. You know how to survive here. You know how to explain this state to yourself and others. You know who you are inside this loop. And ending it would require not just different actions, but a loosening of identity. A release of the role you've learned to perform well. That is what makes this stage so quiet and so difficult to articulate. There is no villain to blame. Only a subtle recognition that the version of you who learned how to manage this cycle may not be the version meant to move forward. At this depth, the cycle is maintained by loyalty. Loyalty to past effort, past suffering, past versions of yourself that worked hard to get you here. Letting the cycle end can feel like betraying that work, as if completion invalidates struggle. But completion does not erase effort. It integrates it. What ends is not the meaning of what you lived, but the necessity to keep living it in the same form. And that distinction is essential. Because many people unconsciously keep cycles alive to protect the dignity of their past. They believe that if they stop now, it means it was all unnecessary. That belief is false. What was necessary was what it taught you. What is no longer necessary is repeating it. Another reason this stage feels isolating is that very few people around you can reflect it back accurately. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. You appear functional, capable, reflective. You may even be admired for your depth and persistence. But internally, there is a quiet mismatch between how much you understand and how little has shifted structurally. That mismatch creates a low-grade tension that cannot be resolved through conversation or explanation. Because it is not about being misunderstood by others, it is about outgrowing a configuration that once fit. At this point, effort becomes counterproductive. Trying harder tightens the loop. Over-analyzing reinforces the identity of the one who is still figuring it out. Even seeking guidance can become a way of delaying the one thing that matters, allowing yourself to stand in the simplicity of what you already know, without converting it into a task. The cycle does not ask you to do more. It asks you to stop doing something very specific. It asks you to stop organizing your life around a version of yourself that was designed for a different phase. This is where many people misinterpret stillness as stagnation. They feel the pull to pause, to not initiate, to not push forward yet, and they label it as procrastination or fear. But often, this pause is the natural response of a system that is reorienting. The old motivations no longer work. The old pressures no longer move you, and instead of forcing new ones, the system waits for alignment. That waiting is not passive, it is integrative. But it requires trust, and trust is difficult when identity is in flux. Cycles persist longest when you believe you must carry your old self into the next phase intact. But transition does not work that way. Something must be left behind, not dramatically, not destructively, but cleanly. A belief, a role, a narrative about who you are and how growth happens for you. And because that narrative once protected you, you hesitate to release it. You wonder if letting go will make you careless, ungrounded, irresponsible. But what you are actually releasing is not discipline or depth. You are releasing friction that no longer serves alignment. This is also the stage where intuition becomes very quiet. Not absent, but subtle. Because intuition does not shout when you already know. It withdraws when it senses that repetition is no longer informative. Many people misread this quiet as disconnection. They think they have lost guidance. In reality, guidance has moved from instruction to confirmation. It waits for you to act from clarity rather than seek direction. And until you do, it remains still. The cycle resets here if you decide to re-engage the old identity. If you tell yourself you need more time, more proof, more readiness, that choice does not feel like avoidance. It feels responsible. But responsibility without alignment is just repetition with justification. And the system responds by recreating the conditions where this identity can function again. Not as punishment, as coherence. What allows the cycle to complete at this stage is a quiet internal decision. Not a declaration, not a plan. A decision to no longer organize your choices around the maintenance of the old self, to allow uncertainty without immediately filling it with effort, to let simplicity replace complexity even if complexity once made you feel safe. This decision is often invisible to others and even hard to describe to yourself, but it is decisive, because once made, the cycle has nothing left to attach to. Completion here feels anticlimactic. There is no rush of emotion, no sense of victory. Just a subtle relief, like setting down something you did not realize you were carrying. And soon after, life begins to move differently. Not faster, cleaner, with less internal negotiation, less friction, less need to convince yourself that you are on the right path. Because alignment does not require persuasion. It simply unfolds. This is the core of Section 3. The cycle does not end when you solve it. It ends when you stop needing to be the one who solve it. When a cycle reaches this stage, the danger is no longer confusion or resistance. The danger is premature movement. Many people feel the internal shift begin, sense that something has loosened, and immediately try to act from it. They announce change, restructure their lives, make declarations, seek confirmation. And in doing so, they unknowingly pull the old cycle into a new costume. Section 4 is about restraint, not as suppression, but as precision. Because when alignment begins to stabilize, movement must follow coherence, not urgency. There is a deep habit in most people to equate clarity with action. If you see something clearly, you believe you must do something immediately to prove that awareness is real. But awareness does not need proof. It needs space. The system needs time to recalibrate without interference. And interference often looks like enthusiasm, ambition, or the desire to finally move forward after a long period of stagnation. This is when many cycles quietly survive their own ending. The moment the internal posture shifts, reality begins to reorganize on its own. Conversations change tone, opportunities appear without force. Certain options lose their charge, others gain weight without drama. But this reorganization is subtle at first. If you rush to impose structure too early, you override the intelligence of the transition. You replace organic alignment with strategic planning, and strategy, when used too soon, recreates the same internal pressure that sustained the cycle before. This stage requires a different relationship with control. Not the absence of it, but its softening. You are no longer managing outcomes. You are observing directionality. You are allowing patterns to reveal themselves without immediately claiming them. This feels unfamiliar because it is not passive, yet it is not aggressive. It is responsive. And responsiveness requires confidence in perception rather than certainty in outcome. Many people sabotage this stage by seeking reassurance. They want someone else to validate that the shift they feel is real. They want confirmation that they are finally doing it right. But seeking reassurance externalizes authority at the exact moment when authority is returning internally, and the system responds accordingly. If you hand decision-making back to external validation, the cycle adjusts to accommodate that posture. The loop does not break, it simply migrates. Another subtle trap here is narrative, the urge to explain what has changed, to frame it as growth, awakening, healing, or success. Narratives feel stabilizing, but they often lock fluid processes into rigid identities. When you name something too quickly, you reduce its range. And cycles thrive inside fixed language. They use labels to survive transitions. This is why true shifts are often quiet. They resist articulation until they are embodied. At this depth, silence becomes functional. Not withdrawal, not secrecy, but selective expression. You do not need to announce what you are integrating. Integration happens beneath language. It reorganizes behavior before belief. It shows up as ease, not explanation. And the more you allow that ease to settle without commentary, the less room the cycle has to reassert itself. This is also where patience must be redefined. Earlier, patience looked like waiting while nothing changed. Here, patience looks like allowing change to complete itself without interruption. It is active restraint, the discipline to not force coherence before it stabilizes. The willingness to let new orientations test themselves through lived experience rather than conceptual certainty. Some discomfort is normal here, not the sharp friction of misalignment, but a soft disorientation. Old reference points are gone, but new ones have not fully formed. This can feel like emptiness or lack of motivation, but it is neither. It is recalibration. The system is adjusting its baseline, and baselines take time to reset. If you mistake this for loss and rush to fill it, you reinstall the old baseline under a new justification. Cycles often survive through productivity, through the need to be doing something meaningful at all times. But meaning is not generated through constant motion. It is revealed through alignment, and alignment expresses itself naturally when the internal signal is clear. Forcing expression before clarity stabilizes creates distortion, not failure, distortion. And distortion is fertile ground for repetition. Trust is the central requirement of this section. Not blind trust, not faith without awareness. Trust in perception. Trust that what you feel is real even if it is quiet. Trust that you do not need to convince anyone, including yourself, that something has shifted. The need to convince is always a sign that alignment is not yet embodied. When embodiment arrives, justification falls away. The system is very precise here. It watches how you respond to the absence of urgency. If you fill it with noise, it will restore pressure. If you allow it to exist, it will deepen coherence. This is not moral, it is mechanical. Reality responds to posture, not intention. And your posture now determines whether the cycle dissolves completely or reforms at a subtler level. What completes the cycle at this stage is not action, explanation, or declaration. It is permission. Permission to let things be unfinished without anxiety. Permission to move slowly without labeling it fear. Permission to let clarity express itself through timing rather than force. When you grant that permission internally, the system stabilizes. And once stabilized, movement becomes inevitable. A movement that comes from this place feels different. It is not driven. It is directed. It does not need motivation because it is not resisting anything. And because there is no resistance, there is no loop to sustain. The cycle has nothing left to feed on. Section 4 is where most people stumble, not because they are unaware, but because they underestimate stillness. They think the work is over and rush to harvest results. But the final integration happens in quiet. And those who allow that quiet to complete itself do not need to try to leave the cycle. They find that it has already let go of them. The final stage of a cycle does not announce itself as an ending. There is no moment where you can clearly say, now it is complete. Completion reveals itself indirectly, through the absence of strain, through the way choices no longer require internal negotiation, through the quiet realization that you are no longer thinking about what used to dominate your attention. Section 5 is about that subtle aftermath, the phase where the cycle has already released you, and your only task is to not reach back for it out of habit. Many people miss completion because they are expecting intensity. They look for relief, excitement, or transformation that feels dramatic. But cycles rarely end with emotion. They end with neutrality. The charge dissolves. The urgency fades. What once felt heavy or confusing becomes unremarkable. And because the mind equates importance with intensity, it may assume nothing significant has happened. In reality, the system has stabilized at a new baseline. and stability does not demand attention. At this stage, the old triggers may still appear externally, but they no longer hook you internally. Situations that once activated fear, overthinking, or self-questioning now pass through with minimal engagement. This is not because you are detached or indifferent, but because your internal orientation has shifted. You are no longer positioned in a way that invites the loop to reform. And loops require participation. Without it, they cannot sustain themselves. There is often a brief period of temptation here. The mind may revisit the old pattern, not out of need, but out of familiarity. It wonders if you are abandoning something important, if you should double-check your decision, if you are becoming complacent. This is not regression. It is the echo of a habit dissolving. And the way you respond to this echo determines whether the completion holds. The response required is not resistance. Resisting the old pattern keeps it alive through opposition. What completes the process is indifference, not coldness, but lack of charge. You notice the thought, the impulse, the memory, and you do not follow it. You do not argue with it. You do not analyze it. You simply allow it to pass without assigning meaning. This is the final release, and it happens naturally when alignment is real. One of the clearest signs that a cycle has ended is the return of simplicity. Decision-making becomes less layered. You no longer need elaborate reasoning to justify your choices. What fits feels obvious. What does not fit loses energy quickly. This does not mean life becomes effortless. It means effort is no longer wasted on internal conflict. Energy flows toward expression rather than containment. Another sign is the disappearance of the need to be understood. Earlier in the cycle, you may have wanted others to recognize your growth, your awareness, your struggle. Now, that desire fades, not because you do not care, but because validation is no longer necessary for stability. You know where you stand, and knowing does not require witnesses. This is also when time feels different. The future no longer feels like a problem to solve. The past no longer feels like something to redeem. You are not fixated on what is coming or what has been lost. You are engaged with what is present without effort. And presence, when unforced, is the natural state of a system that is no longer looping. Cycles often convince people that they must extract meaning before moving on. But meaning is not extracted. It emerges. And at this stage, meaning begins to show itself in practical ways, in the kinds of situations you attract, in the tone of your interactions, in the absence of struggle where struggle once seemed inevitable. These are not rewards. They are reflections of alignment. There is a quiet humility in this phase. You realize that much of what you thought was personal struggle was simply structural misalignment. Not a flaw, not a failure, just a configuration that had run its course. This realization softens judgment toward yourself and others. You see how many people are still inside loops they cannot yet see, and instead of wanting to pull them out, you allow them their timing. Because you understand now that cycles cannot be ended from the outside. The system does not ask you to hold on to completion. Holding implies effort. Completion sustains itself through coherence. All that is required is honesty. If something begins to feel misaligned again, you notice it early. You do not negotiate with it. You do not justify staying. You respond while awareness is fresh. This is not vigilance. It is attunement. And attunement is light. What comes after a cycle is not another lesson. It is space. Space to act without overthinking. Space to relate without defense. Space to create without proving. And that space can feel unfamiliar at first because you are no longer oriented around resolution. But soon, it feels natural, like breathing without noticing it. The greatest risk at this stage is nostalgia for intensity. Many people confuse depth with difficulty. They believe that if life feels calm, something must be missing. But calm is not emptiness. It is integration. And integration is the ground from which real expression grows. This is where the cycle truly ends, not with a declaration, not with a breakthrough, but with a quiet continuation of life that no longer circles the same center. You do not feel like someone who escaped a loop. You feel like someone who is simply moving forward without resistance. And that is the clearest sign of completion there is. If you are here now, reading or hearing this with a sense of recognition rather than urgency, then the cycle has already loosened its grip. All that remains is to trust what has settled, to live from it without trying to name it, and to allow the new trajectory to unfold without dragging the old one along behind you.